Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Lori Lynn Turner, the Associate Director of the New School Writing Program. We are honored to partner with Canem, an organization that produces programs with the perfect union of intellect and heart, and all with style. Tonight's event, Poets on Craft, features Natalie Handel and A. Van Jordan. The conversation and Q&A will be moderated by Joseph A. Legaspi. I would like to invite Allison Myers, the Executive Director of Canem Foundation, to come up to the podium to do the introductions. Allison.
Thank you, Lori Lynn. First, welcome. It's a pleasure to be part of this signature Canem program, Poets on Craft, which was launched here at the New School with Major Jackson and Suji Kwak Kim in 2008. For making this evening's event possible with essential support, I first want to thank our host and sponsor, the New School, especially Luis Jaramillo and Lori Lynn Turner, as well as our supporting funders, the New York State Council on the Arts, the Mrs. Giles Whiting Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. It's an honor to introduce three fine and influential poets, this evening's readers and conversationalists, Nathalie Handal and A. Van Jordan, and our friend and colleague, Joseph Legaspi, who will moderate their exchange. Natalie and Van will start the program with brief readings, then settle into a lively discussion sparked by Joseph's smart questions and observations. A brief Q&A with you, our audience, will follow. After, please do stay for a lovely reception courtesy of the New School, a book signing with the poets, and an opportunity to meet and talk with one another and our poets. A poet of the world and decidedly in the world, Nathalie Handal has lived in Europe, the US, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the Arab regions. She is a prize-winning author of work that Alice Walker praises as poems of depth and weight and the sorrowing song of longing and resolve. A voyager and exiled observer, Natalie is anything but a tourist. Rather, her poems travel to deep and compassionate places of the heart and intellect and explore a recurring truth, which she names the persistent tragedy of otherness. Her aesthetic is capacious, with lines like, "History is nothing more than the smell of dew in our bones." Her lyric is deceptively plain-spoken, yet upon reflection, complex and historic. Her lines explore the unique songfulness of tradition, place, and suffering, all the while staking a claim in possibility, compassion, and the poetics of transformation. Her poetry collections include The Neverfield, The Lives of Rain, recipient of the Manata Literary Award, Love and Strange Horses, winner of the Gold Medal Independent Publisher Book Award for 2011, and most recently, Poet in Andalucía, a unique recreation in reverse of Federico Garcia Lorca's Poet in New York. The recipient of many recognitions, among them a Lannan Foundation Fellowship, a Fundación Araguaney Fellowship, and the AE Ventures Fellowship. Natalie was an honored finalist for the 2009 Gift of Freedom Award and shortlisted for New London Writers Award and the Arts Council England Writers Award. Yusuf Komanyaka has called her work, "This cosmopolitan voice belongs to the human family, and it luxuriates in crossing necessary borders." A. Van Jordan is the author of 4 poetry collections, very recently, The Cineaste, hailed as work that goes beyond memorable speech into an articulation of the spirit, the hunger, the enchantment and terror of a nation and a time. His earlier collections include Rise, winner of a 2002 Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award, Quantum Lyrics, and Magnolia, recipient of a 2005 Anisfield-Wolf Award. A poet influenced by music, film, and history, his subject matter is wide-ranging and riveting, as in Quantum Lyrics, which delves into physics, racism, history, and Albert Einstein's work for human rights. Described by Terrance Hayes as a master of the dramatic monologue, Van is the recipient of a Whiting Writers Award, a Pushcart Prize, a John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, a United States Artist Williams Fellowship, and an Anisfield-Wolf Book Award. A CavanKerry Fellow, he is a professor in the Department of English at the University of Michigan and teaches in the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. Joseph O. Legaspi is the author of Imago, a collection of poems published by CavanKerry Press. The co-founder of Kundiman, an organization dedicated to the creation and cultivation of Asian American poetry, his poems have appeared in Poem a Day from the Academy of American Poets, World Literature Today, Jubilat, Cura, Diode, Gay and Lesbian Review, North American Review, Waterstone Review, From the Fish House, and the anthologies Language for a New Century, Collective Brightness, Flicker and Spark, and Coming Close. His new chapbook, Subways, sold out, is a book of prose poems about his daily commute via the New York City subway, released this October by Thrush Press. Please join me now in welcoming for her reading at this podium, Nathalie Handal.
Thank you so much, Allison. And thank you all for coming on this very, very chilly day, evening. In the 80s, I was in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and I pretty much left right after Duvalier was ousted. And after that, soon afterwards, I went to Spain. And that's when I discovered Lorca for the first time. I read him as a very young girl, and the area in Andalucía, this area, reminded me very much of where my family comes from, which is Bethlehem in the Holy Land, not Pennsylvania. And and the olive trees, and it had a really strong impact on me. And of course, what I didn't recognize at the time was really the history of Islamic Spain and what the Jews and the Christians and the Muslim created together. Years later, I never thought I'd come to New York City, but I came here right after 9/11 and became a New Yorker. And Lorca's work became even more important to me. And of course, Port in New York is such an important text. And I decided that I wanted to recreate his journey and go back. And as the situation in the Middle East was getting worse, and especially in the Holy Land, and with Bethlehem and Jerusalem being separated, and they were always sister cities, I felt I wanted to revisit the idea of convivencia, which means coexistence between the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews. And of course, during this journey, everyone I spoke to, the Jewish scholars, the Muslim scholars, nobody agreed. And I thought, oh my God, there's never going to be peace. But what I held on to was a quote from Mahmoud Darwish, the wonderful Palestinian poet. He wrote, I quote, "Andalus might be here or there or anywhere, a meeting of place of strangers in the project of building human culture. It is not only that there was a Jewish-Muslim coexistence, but the fates of the two people were similar. Al-Andalus, for me, is the realization of the dream of the poem." And of course, finally, at the pulse of this book was what Lorca said, "Lo que más me importa es vivir." And I really believe that peace is possible if people really want to. So I will start the evening with an excerpt from the poem Convivencia. 800 years of love. We can't be strangers now. We are here to allow the other to be here. There is a sea beyond the sea. But who is watching us when we make love? If your heart is not mine, the kiss you placed on my lips is mine. The word you drew on the palm of my hand is mine. Your touch, the afternoon on the banks, is mine. The continent you placed by the chariot is mine. But what about this paradise? Who is it for? We knew we were both in it. We also knew we can't lose a paradise we've seen. Granada sings Whitman. By the river Genil, lovers sing what belonged to the water. A shoemaker sings the dream he had, his helper the dream he didn't. A woman sings to a man on a mattress. Death at midday sings on the banks of the Daro. A blind thief collecting golden poplars sing, and so does the crevice of quivers, the saints flaming La Sierra, and the men rehearsing a country. They know nothing stays, but when Whitman sings, they allow his voice to take them apart. When I went to, as you know, Lorca went to Cuba after New York. And so my Cuba was Tangiers, which basically in Andalucía, if you take the boat, 1.5 hours later, you're in North Africa. And really, I don't know if you've read Bowles' book or you've read about Tangiers. It really feels like it's paused in time, and it's quite extraordinary. So I'll read Tanger Bleu. He gave her a bakshish and left. It was too early for confusion. He collected old meanings in the Medina. She collected laughter. He wanted more of childhood. She wanted more of the sea. They needed more of their bodies to confront themselves. A flame and a leaf, a cool wind, a fez flying away. She knew a journey was like walking on the ocean like a prophet, hiding glories. But this was Tanger, and it was important to say lost. So the city took him from one blank wall to another to keep him from asking for more. He still came to the Café Central every day, still waited for her to say monsieur, still needed the mess of images, the badly paved roads. He liked that there were hours waiting by the sea. There was a crush on the ground. The air had broken the window, broken the small hums and that version of their heart. He didn't know how to imagine this. He knew he didn't owe death anything, but he owed love. He knew magic accepted something strange here, but he didn't know where the spirit was. He knew that here you get what you want, even if you don't know what your want is. He looked at the jalaba by the chair, the keef on the broken table, the book by Muhammad Shukri. What music do we record when we record? What would she say? Like the drum, the drum, the drum, the runes and the cliffs, like the first time he heard Allahu Akbar and slept in the desert. There is no coming back from solitude. Then he was back. C'est chaud, she said, placed a small blue glass in front of him and whispered, nostalgia is just something we do here. There's also walking in the mud, drinking tea, and reading Tennessee Williams. Tell me, how many compassions does it take before freedom turns noise into an album? He looked at her. Didn't she know the ocean has missing pages? That we have forsaken memory and the sky to deliver belief to a savior. They say a man who looks at the sea knows something about his soul, though it's uncertain if salt is too heavy on the tongue, if heroes wear masks, and if, when a man finally understands grief, which means he finally understands history, that's when he knows how a face rots. Quel bled, he finally answered. They looked at each other as the birds folded their wings, like Desaur bowing to something they felt but could never describe. Yes, cities can grow quiet, and neither can an empire. They keep growing differently. The television on, the flags rising. Who loves a nation best? They tried to remember the day they promised never to hurt each other. But that was when they still had sharp teeth. Now, they take each other apart and look at a picture of a city and a man waiting for the same woman. And I'll end the evening with a new poem. It's tradition. Like I said, I came here after 9/11, and I became American on January 20th, 2009, exactly the day Obama became president. I couldn't believe it. I called the lawyer and I said, is this a joke? But it really was an important moment for me because my relationship with Haiti and with borders, really, because my family then went to the Dominican Republic. So the Haiti-Dominican border, the Palestine-Israel border, I feel anyways, my entire life has been just living between France and the United States. So this is a little bit my take of New York. And I also want to say that so I've been sort of writing about coming into my Americanness or my American identity. And, you know, coming from a third world space, that's always, it's conflicting. Although for me, my experience in New York and the United States has been incredibly rewarding. Just being able to be a poet in this world is such a gift. And I have to say that if we rewind back in the late 90s, my very first assignment that Mahmoud Darwish gave me was go interview Allen Ginsberg. And I told him, can't you give me something easier? And of course, I didn't do a good job, but it was just terrible. But I did interview Allen Ginsberg, and he did pass away a month later. And that just years later became really important. And I also want to say that another thing that happened to me that was incredible was when I went to Andalucía to write poet in Andalucía, I hadn't been back in Haiti in over 20 years. And right when I was in Spain, there was the earthquake in 2010. And it was that moment that I decided I had to go back and revisit Haiti. And it just so happened that Zadie Smith was working on a project, and the Soros Foundation sent 10 writers to developing countries, and I went to Port-au-Prince. And as you know, not only had the city changed, but after the earthquake, it had collapsed. And I've gathered a lot of the stories that I heard since then. But to end the evening, to end the reading, this is Takes at the Bowery. And my mother says I've started cursing too much since I've been in New York. So, take one. Is it an American god or an Egyptian one? What's the difference? Neither is ever there. Take two. We listen to Funk Me Up and go to the hardware store to find a wrinkled vowel. We quit happiness. Take three. We save a recording of a star-spangled banner and make Napoleons for our guests. Fix our satellite, wear our baseball caps, leave the sweepstakes on the counter for later. Don't overthink life. Take four. My brother listens to Frank Sinatra in the other room as the stock market crashes. Take five. There aren't enough tramps, explorers, and navigators here anymore. Only vampire movies. Thank God Anne Waldman and Bob Homan haven't given up. There's still hope at the Bowery Poetry Club. And there's sure a lot of hope with CavanKerry around in the New School and Asian American Workshop. Take six. My Islam is cool t-shirt pissed you off, but you slept with me anyways. Take seven. A foreigner abandoned Jesus last week for a pack of cigarettes, American Stripes. He named his dog Balzac, then Elvis. He left. He felt like an empire jerking off alone. Take eight. Time making noise. Yes, we had abbreviated sex and held on to the prelude. Take nine. Our faces flood the water. We argued with the mist, tried to find an exit, a book, to contemplate disappearance. Take 10. We forget the Arabs gave us algebra, that Thomas Jefferson kept the Quran in his library. Take 11. Why are all these takes different? 'Cause it's New York City, asshole. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. That was incredible. Thanks so much. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's just great to be, one, back in New York City, and two, here for a CavanKerry event. And I just want to thank Allison, who I haven't seen in years. We figured out since the last time I was at a CC event. So I'm going to read about maybe 3 or 4 poems. And you know, I was listening to you, Natalie. I was thinking just how cosmopolitan I don't feel. you know. And one of the things, and one of the kind of, I guess, the aftermath of that is feeling like you want to escape. And this is how the Cineaste came about. Going to the movies as a kid in Akron, Ohio, one of the things that I really enjoyed was going to this theater. It was the Akron Civic Theater, which is one of the few atmospheric theaters in the country. It's only 5 of them left in the country, which means that it's the inside has this kind of Spanish Moor design, and the ceiling is kind of like being in a planetarium. So you have these stars and clouds and things that are actually moving in the ceiling. And recently I went to see the restored edition of Metropolis in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at a theater that was built in 1927. And in that theater, there was, because it was built during the silent film era, there's an organ that is on a hydraulic lift. And I was thinking I hadn't seen that since I was a kid at that theater in Akron. And so when the film came out, the restored edition came out, I was thinking that I'd seen the movie, but then I realized there was almost an hour of the film that I hadn't seen and that had been restored. So it's a 3-hour film now. And because it was only played in one place, the line was around the block to see this film, because people came from all over the state to Ann Arbor to see the film. And so we go inside and we sit down, and the manager comes out, and the manager says, we're going to hold the film to make sure everyone gets in. And no one complained about this, So we waited 30 minutes for the film to start. And as people, came in and sat down, watched the film, there was no texting, no one was talking. When people got up to go to the bathroom, they were still reading intertitle cards as, scooting through. And I thought, what happened to that experience of going to the movies? So this first poem is about that, and it's Metropolis Restored Edition, Michigan Theater, Ann Arbor, September 14, 2010. Listening to the organist play feels like eavesdropping inside the mind of a giant, a bipolar giant whose emotions are so fragile. I want to climb up her arm to lay my hand on her shoulder. The screen has yet to capture the first gray glimpse of skyline. Music envelops the theater, enclosing the city in a throat filled with indifference. A city under a chiaroscuro of sunlight and shadow, imagined by those working in the depths of the metropolis. A sort of giant, too, with some real issues to work out. I remember watching as a child in downtown Akron, Wild Oscar play the organ ascending from beneath the stage at the Lowe's Theater long before it was renamed the Civic Theater, and even longer before it needed restoring to save its life. Wild Oscar would play before the feature or during the silent Crazy Cat shorts preceding the main event. Going to the movies seemed monumental. Live music, opening acts, serpentine lines around the block. When Oscar played, I wondered now if he was happy, or was he beneath the stage the whole time toiling like the workers in the film tonight, preserving a magic moviegoers still believe in, the way voters and lovers do not. Like many children, I believed I would do something with my potential once I simply grew up. Like many adults, I stayed a child, potential hanging around like a shadow. But every now and then, like tonight, I catch up with my shadow self and show up in a theater to see a restored edition of an old film about workers holed up in a factory for too many hours and lovers separated, like most lovers, by their ideas. One worker steps offline, reprieved by a brother worker, and suddenly the sky appears. And the whole rectilinear contraption, and I mean their lives, not just the plant, comes tumbling down, an arcade of beliefs in ruins. I wonder what it all means to this audience whose laughter rings a bit condescending in the crude moments of melodrama. It's so easy to laugh at the banana peels laid before the lives of others. Sad to see the young act too old to feel naive, no suspension of disbelief. Not me. Movies provide my last safe playground. Tonight, for instance, when the organist descends to play and the lights expire and the projection whirs to action, I'm as excited as a child again. When the organ ascends, what am I but as dazed as the workers climbing from the depths of the metropolis, a little disappointed, filled with questions, wondering how will I go on with my day's work outside in all that natural light. And so with the book, most of the poems are just the titles of films, and I'm just kind of riffing off those films. And sometimes it's riffing off the theme of the film, sometimes it's riffing off of the idea of being the villain in the film or the protagonist of the film. And the one restriction I placed for myself with the poems was thinking about things that were happening in the film structurally that I could in some way bring into the poem, and also thinking about the use of the image system within that film. And so this next poem is a Korean film by Park Chan-wook from 2003, part of what he calls the Revenge Trilogy. And this is Old Boy. And Old Boy is a film. How many people have seen this movie, Old Boy? Just a couple of people? It's a crazy film, so, but it's a beautiful film. And strangely enough, it's about to be remade by Spike Lee. But the film's about a guy who's been kidnapped and held captive in an apartment building for 15 years. And then he's released, and he has no idea why he was kidnapped. But while he was held captive, his family's been murdered, all except for his daughter. And the police suspect that he's the murderer because he's been gone for 15 years. And so he was released. He's trying to clear his name. He's also trying to figure out why he was kidnapped. And that's the big mystery of the film. Old Boy. If one rainy night you find yourself leaving a phone booth and you meet a man with a lavender umbrella, resist your desire to follow him, to seek shelter from the night in his solace. Later, don't fall victim to the hypnotist's narcotic of clarity, which proves a curare for the heart. Her salve is merely a bandage under which memories pulse. Resist the taste for something still alive for your first meal. Resist the craving for a touch of a hand from your past. We live some memories, and some memories are planted. There's only so much space for the truth and the fabrications to spread out in one's mind. When there's no more space, we grow desperate. You'll ask if practicing love for years in your mind prepares you for the moment, if practicing to defend one's life is the same as living. You'll hole up captive in a hotel room for 15 years and learn to find a man within you, which will prove a painful introduction to the trance into which you were born. Better to stay under the spell of your guilt than to forget. You've already released your pain onto the world. Don't believe there's some joy in forgetting. There's no joy in the struggle to forget. And what appears as an endless verdant field only spreads across a building's rooftop. Your peaceful sleep could be a fetal position which secures you in a suitcase in this field. A bell rings, and you fall out of this luggage like clothes you no longer fit. Now what to do? You remember when you were the man who fit those clothes, but you've forgotten this world. Even forgotten scenes from your life leave shadows of the memory, haunting your spirit, until within a moment's glance, strangers passing you on the street observe history in your eyes. Experience lingers through acts of forgetting, small acts of love or trauma falling from the same place. Whether memory comes in the form of a stone or a grain of sand, they both sink in water. A tongue, even if it were, say, sworn to secrecy, or if it were cut from one's mouth, yes, even without a mouth to envelop its truth, a tongue continues to confess. And like I said, Spike Lee is remaking that film. So this next poem is a Spike Lee film, Do the Right Thing. And I'm in New York, so I'm assuming most people have seen Do the Right Thing or know about it. A hot summer day in Brooklyn with different characters, Mookie, Radio Raheem, Bugging Out. Do the right thing. The days were a skillet on a red-hot eye of a stove. The men on the corner, the couple in their apartment, the kids playing under a fire hydrant's relief were all sitting, loving, or playing in a skillet. Heat rose off the assonance of summer language. Some called it music, others called it fire. The days were a skillet, but the nights were a match lighting the gas. No moon appeared, only steam rising off the sidewalks from the day. Feet danced on the skillet, and smoke alarms sounded. Moths, fierce as kids at play on a summer day, burst from musty closets. People were evicted, put out like butter sliding across a skillet's face. Most of us were outside by then, swatting bees, swatting flies. We outlived the lifespan of giraffes and cheetahs made for this weather. Or we sat on our stoops, indolent but defiant, simply escaping the drama of our own lives. Even those indoors without air conditioning, we like to believe at least, escaped the heat somehow. Mookie, to cool her fire, melted ice cubes on Tina's nipples. Radio Raheem stole ink off Robert Mitchum's knuckles. He took the heat too, casting love and hate into digital bling. When did Soul Brother become an anachronism, too hot for air-conditioned conversation? And Sal's Pizzeria, bugging out bugs. Sal, why ain't no brothers up on your wall? Smiley, auguring smoke before nightfall, carried matches. The day is a skillet on a red-hot eye of a stove. Later, a cop has Radio Raheem in a chokehold. Later, we will light candles for Radio Raheem. If a man takes a baseball bat to another man's property, that's a skillet too. If a man throws a barrel through a plate glass window, others will follow. A Pyrrhic victory is a pyre of life possession set ablaze to save lives. Catharsis is the moth's flight toward the flame, fluttering in the spotlight, or first fluttering, then finding the power to flutter, but consumed by the heat till all we know of its shimmer is how one smolders to survive. And I'll close with an oldie but goodie film by the genius Mel Brooks. This is Blazing Saddles. You know, it's a comedy, but it's also serious. Probably, to me, I think it's one of the most brilliant films on race. Co-written with Mel Brooks with Richard Pryor, who was supposed to star in the film, but Cleavon Little ended up playing that part. I just want to say thanks again, Allison and Natalie. I'm looking forward to having the conversation with Joseph and Natalie, too. Blazing Saddles. What's so funny about racism is how the racists never get the joke. In most settings, racists stick out like Count Basie's orchestra in the middle of a prairie, just as awkward as he is elegant compared to the world around him. And if you still don't get it, imagine a chain gang with perfect pitch singing Cole Porter's "I Get a Kick Out of You" to their overseer, whose frustration swells so for an authentic nigger work song, he and his crew demonstrate their darkest desires and break into song themselves. The Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah, kicking up their heels in the dirt, tasting an old slave trick on their tongues, each syllable falling from their lips like a bowl of cotton. Funny to the naked eye, but consider the Native American who speaks Yiddish, emerging from the dust of the Old West, reminding us of how we learn to comfort in making ourselves a little uncomfortable over time in the fossils of race. Jump cut. Black Bart, our hero, enters town where danger awaits him. Our hero, who we hope to see beat up bad guys and win the woman. Even when the hero is black and the woman, Lily von Stoop, is German. One false move and nigger gets it. Yes, self-sacrifice, holding his gun to his own head, but the unwitting white liberals save him from himself, which is their life's mission. You see, what's so funny about racists is how they never get the joke, because the joke always carries some truth. Notice how we can laugh in recognizing a sample of our own design and our own likeness, a likeness we own, so we can laugh at the absurd pain of it all. This joke like aloe smoothed on a wound, like a black man trying to do a job in a town where he's not wanted, like a black man unzipping his pants in the Old West for a white woman in a hotel room in the center of this town. Did I mention how he was just released from a chain gang? Did I mention that she was an exotic dancer who slept with men for money, helping them hang their insecurities on a hook on the back of a hotel room door before entering? Careful with your laughter. One false move and nigger here gets appropriated. That's not funny to you? Well, when they saw themselves on screen in their comedy drama romance in the theater's darkness, they laughed. They needed to see it projected on the wide screen to get a good cathartic laugh from the tragedy of the 20th century. And it's okay to laugh at these ironies today because they're blown from a wind of past pain with the velocity of memory. You see, when the Jewish artist has suffered enough, he knows he can strike back with just a stroke of laughter. A black man stooping a German floozy who tries to ensnare him between her legs but gets hoisted by her own garter petard. Well, that's just some funny shiza. So please excuse all this humor wrapped in truth or its chiasmus. Ready or not, stand back, please, and back away from all those stereotypes restraining you from stereotypes you aspire to. As you deny self through elective surgery on your nose or lips, excuse me, please, as I rear back in laughter, and excuse me as I recall the 1970s and remember myself laughing blue-black gut-bursting songs of truth. Yeah, please excuse me, folks, as I whip this out. Thank you.
That's a great reading. I have my iPhone here, not to touch or anything. I just, it's my clock. So.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Again, great reading. I'm so honored to be here moderating this discussion, this talk, which is going to be free-flowing. And there's also a chance for questions afterwards. We'll probably talk for the next 35, 40 minutes. Get those questions going, last 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, we'll open up for questions. When I put these two books side by side, I mean, what struck me is really like their scale, like their ambition. So just to start off, can you give us more of like an overview of how you even start something like this? I know with like Natalie, with a poet in Andalucía, there's just so much going on. There's a lot of history, languages. Just give us an overview of how, from the seed of the idea to like the fruition, and it's the same with Cineaste. And also if you can comment on the structure as well of the books, which I find really interesting. So.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure, go for it.
Go for it. Most of the time when I'm working on a project, I never think about it too much. Otherwise, I'll probably not do it. For Poet in Andalucía, really, there was a blueprint, a map, because I was recreating Lorca's journey in reverse, and Lorca had written this book, and I wanted to really follow the structure of Poet in New York. But one thing is that when I got to Spain, I mean, I got to, there are many different Spains. There's like 3 or 4 countries there, right? Catalonia is one thing, Galicia is another, Basque country, Andalucía. I mean, they're very different, and also even linguistically, okay? So I didn't expect, or but you never are prepared for how much you're going to encounter. But just focusing on Andalucía, there's so much history there. There's so much I read in the Arab Andalusian literature. In terms of form that you ask me, I read the poem Convivencia, which comes from, there's the ghazal or ghazal and the zvi, I write in the book, which the Persian tradition that we are more familiar with here is a form poem. But in Arabic, it's actually a love poem. And it's not a form poem. And the Zvi is the Hebrew version of a poem of desire. And so I kept discovering one thing after another. And of course, in Arabic, there's the qasida, which is a long poem. And I discovered the kitas, which are short sort of fragments. And that was really interesting to me, because coming from such a fragmented background, the idea of these small fragments in form was extremely interesting. And also, there are debates in the Spanish language, how many Spanish words derive from the Arabic. You can hear it's 5% to 20%. So in that poem, I use a lot of the Spanish words that derive from Arabic. So it kept being a mix and a fusion of cultures. And the idea that, this purity that we speak about so much, it doesn't exist because we're always having a conversation with history, the past and the present. That's why, the poets from the generation of the 27, which and the older poets from the golden ages. I mean, everybody's conversing in this book. It's really a meeting of so much culture, and also the idea that really, if we can create this art, and this art can put us in a platform of conversation, why aren't we having this conversation, for instance, in the Holy Land, which is the Holy Land, and it feels like there's nothing holy there, and so that was really just on my mind a lot as I traveled through.
So, with the Cineaste, strangely enough, I didn't read the largest section from the largest section of the book tonight, but the book's inception really came from trying to write about the filmmaker Oscar Micheaux, who started off in the silent era and made films into the talkies, over 40 films. There's only about maybe 9 extant copies of them now. But he started making film. His first film was in 1919, The Homesteader, which was a remake an adaptation, I should say, of his novel by the same name. And he was in South Dakota, Gregory, South Dakota, homesteader there. And in 1915, Birth of a Nation comes out. And, at that point on the timeline of film, most films sort of look like home movies. And like one of the most exciting things happening in film, in the States at least, was watching prize fights on film. And that was the thing that in the United States, people got a sense of, well, this stuff is marketable. Like people will actually go to the theater to watch a drama. And in Italy and Germany, other parts of Europe, film was already sort of flourishing and taking off. But in the States, Birth of a Nation was the first real feature film that captured the imagination of the country. And it, unfortunately, was an incredibly racist film with the Klan as the center, at the center of this film, with the slogan. Every time I hear the Tea Party slogan, I always think about this movie because in the film they're saying, we're taking our country back, and that's what the Tea Party is taking this up that banner. And so what happened at that time is that the Klan had died out in the States during the Reconstruction era. In 1915, the film comes out, and there's this resurgence of interest in the Klan. And Klan chapters start sprouting up all over the country. The Klan, believe it or not, came to the premiere of Birth of a Nation, and they were in regalia on the red carpet, if you can imagine that. By 1919, we have the Red Summer with all the violence of that. Micheaux was so toggling between South Dakota and Chicago at the time, and he married a woman from Chicago, and he, decided, I want to get involved with this. He was an acolyte of Booker T. Washington, and he was incredibly interested in being, a worker with his hands, but also he translated that into his art form. And in 1915, Birth of a Nation comes out, Booker T. Washington dies, and he decides he's going to do something. And so the initial idea of the book came about through thinking around the impact, trying to imagine what it would feel like at this point to have a new art form, some new art form that would capture the American consciousness and have that kind of influence on us. And at the same time, that could go either way. It could be used for good or for evil. And then the other part was, Michaud being sort of an autodidact, I mean, he this guy went from tilling land in South Dakota to making film, and taught himself how to make film before there were like film schools or anything like that. But he just was determined to do it, and he made film after film after film. By 1925, he kind of hit his stride, and he comes out with Body and Soul. The first time we see Paul Robeson on film. And so initially it was just a kind of, the idea was trying to capture him, and writing this longer poem about that experience of learning a new art form and experiencing a new art form. And then I started thinking about the ways in which he becomes kind of emblematic of the artist and the artistic journey. And I wanted to put him in context with other films. And so the other film poems, some of the stuff I read tonight, came after that.
Yeah. Well, I do want to discuss more the homesteader as well, because I'm really interested in some of the narrative strategies that you both use. I mean, for you, it's movies. For Natalie's travel, but also what forms, poetic forms you use. For instance, I mean, the homesteader is basically collection of sonnets. And there are two moments in there that are crowns of sonnets. So basically the question is like, how do these poetic forms lend to, I guess, articulate, you know, in terms of movies, what you're trying to say about movies in this book, or travel in terms of, because you also have not only the ghazal, which means more than the form, I've learned, and also other, the Quran.
Yeah, the kitab.
The kitab, yeah. So comment on like how poetic forms actually, I guess, how the use of these poetic devices in poetry establishes what your intentions are in the collection.
I think there's more form in yours. You want to talk about?
I mean, I can. I mean, you know, for me, the issue of form was a way of controlling a large story that moved around a lot. And so, you know, it was just an artistic problem, and trying to solve an artistic problem. And so, you know, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to write a poem about a guy, you know, being a Pullman porter, becomes a homesteader, who becomes a novelist, who becomes a filmmaker. He's been married. He's following this murder trial in Atlanta, the Leo Frank versus Mary Fagan trial. That's influencing him. Birth of a Nation's happening. How do you contain all that stuff?
Right.
And so, you know, one form that becomes flexible enough in 2013 to still contain that and have enough agility with the language is the sonnet. Mm-hmm. And so the sonnet became part of that. And then the other part was thinking about the artistic problem of movement through time and place. And so with these sonnets, many of the sonnets are separated by screenplay directions. Mm-hmm. And so we'll say cut to this place, this time, this location. And, you know, the screenplay is one of these, in the writing arts, is like the only one that we don't publish or read. You know, like we'll read a dramatic play. We'll read, you know, prose and poetry, but the screenplay is just sort of, it's seen as just as a tool.
Which is ironic, because we're such a movie culture.
I know,
right?
it's such a movie culture. But if you read a screenplay, they solve many of the artistic problems that we think about. So when we're thinking about how do we get this person from this time period to the next time period, how do we get this person from this room to the next room, and in the screenplay it's just cut to, you know, you're there and it says this place, this time, night, whatever, and you do it and you just let the action take place. And so you know, I just sort of borrowed that for this and incorporated it with the sonic crown.
Well, I spoke a little about, the forms, but for me it was more, I was visiting the different Andalusian cities. So, I'd get to Sevilla and Cordoba and Granada and the different cities, and, I'd discover something different there. So I sort of kind of went along And whatever emerged from that place, whether it was, a new form, as I spoke about the kitas, or, the ghazal, the whole, because really the Convivencia poem came when I went to Cordoba. When I got there, I don't know if you've ever been there, but really there's like a cathedral mosque. You're in this cathedral, it's splendid, and it used to be, it's like a cathedral and a mosque at a church, sorry, and cathedral, yeah, sorry, together, and then you leave it and you go across, and there's the old Sephardic quarter. And it feels very much like you're in sort of like the old city in Jerusalem. So that's how that poem came about. Also, when I was there, it was interesting because their version of the Time Out, there was a band called Al Handal, just like my name. And I thought, ooh, where do these boys find this name? Because the only place I've ever seen this name is in Bethlehem, even if, when we say it in English, it doesn't sound like, it doesn't have an Arabic meaning. So I was determined to find out, and I went around asking, and I discovered that the word, my name actually means bitter medicinal plant. And and so they used to sell it in the Arab Islamic pharmacies, and I think some of them still have. So I guess they used that name. But there was all these, just it was constant conversation everywhere I went. So the book sort of grew from there.
I'm also curious because I feel like these books are hybrid books. Like, I feel that these are just not poetry books, like yours, with the fusion of the screenplay and, and poetry, and yours, it's very journalistic, and it's like a travelogue almost, because it's very site-specific. Do you feel like, with poetry nowadays, is there a move towards that, again, like breaking some kind of idea that poetry is not just poetry anymore? I don't know if you can comment on that.
I don't know. I think, one of the things I talk about with my students is, the fact that poetry, we have more freedom in poetry probably than any other art form. And we don't have the restriction of having to be produced or
sold.
Or sold, yeah, exactly. There's not that pressure, right? And then, the tools are we don't need the equipment. We don't need a studio or paint or whatever, And so we should explore with abandon, like every obsession that we have. And so, with that in mind, I think that there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of risk-taking that takes place on the page. And I think it's the perfect, the perfect art form for that. And, I don't think it's that unusual to have another art form inform another. But the idea of thinking about how can we keep this art form moving over time? Like what can happen over time to keep it progressing? And I think that comes through the sort of experimentation with form.
I think it's good to be disobedient anyways. But I think we grow from that. One of the things, I don't know as an artist if any of what I've written I would have written. I'm thinking right now of what I'm working on now. It's a book on Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And most of the poems are prose poems. And once upon a time, I never thought I'd write a prose poem, okay? And they're prose poems because they're the stories. Actually, I kind of call them flash témoignages because they're loosely based on stories that were told to me from Haiti and from Haitians and from people at the border, Haitians who went into the Dominican Republic, and also the Dominicans, especially those not in the city as much, but in the country. So when I heard these stories, it came to me as a prose poem, you know, and you know, you don't necessarily plan for it. It just comes that way. And also, it's interesting to think about these crossings. You know, when you read Lydia Davis, you know, sometimes she has these like two line stories. They're amazing, and I think it's okay to give us these permissions. Like those prose poems, I mean, some of them could really be just called flash fiction. So it's I think we come to them without, you know, they're surprises. We allow them to come in, and I think that's the gift, you know, creating.
Yeah. Also, by extension, an older poet said that, oh, no one writes poetry collections anymore. Like every book now is project driven. What would you say about that in terms of, is that something because of what's going on in the publishing world, especially with poetry contests? Is it easier to market something like that has already have a tagline? For instance, like, oh, these are a group of poems about, you know, New England farming life circa 1895, as opposed to just collections of just poems? Or is that maybe like harkening back to something Homeric, you know? What you guys are doing in terms of like, you know, like a very specific, for instance, like Poet in Andalucia's very specific kind of movement and project. I'm just curious about that. Like overhearing this like lament by this older poet of a different generation saying that there's no poetry collection anymore. True or false?
I just think we express ourselves differently according to the time. I mean, Derek Walcott, he was my teacher, and he's always cursing young poets because we don't have, you know, we don't use rhyme anymore, and we're not. So I think it's really, it's just, I mean, we're writing, we're using the language that we have at that moment. So I don't know that.
Do you feel that there's like nowadays you need to have a hook, for instance, in terms of like publishing something?
I don't.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I think I don't think I even agree with that statement.
Yeah,
you
true
know,
or false.
Because I feel like there's a pretty great diversity in the poetry world. I can think of, I mean, just sitting here, I'm thinking about different poets, and I'm thinking, oh, well, I don't think that book's a project. You know, I think about Terrance Hayes' collections, or yeah, you know, I think about
Or actually Jackie Lamont's book too.
Yeah. I mean, you know, which I just taught in one of my classes. She was nice enough to Skype in and talk to my students. But I mean, there's so many voices out there now, and I think more now than ever, I feel like the opportunities to publish are wider, and there are more poets because of the advent of the MFA explosion. That's what I call it, and you know, so I think we're thinking more. We're constantly trying to categorize and compartmentalize writers, but I think there's a great diversity of voices out there, a great diversity of aesthetics. When you really take inventory of the books out there, I just can't, you know, I just can't put poetry in one box. I just don't see it.
I agree.
It's interesting because like these two books in a way are dialectical in terms of like what a poet is in a way. Like one is a traveler, and one in a way, this is not at all like static at all, but like, you know, a moviegoer, like a viewer.
Traveling in another way.
Traveling in another way. So it's is that like a perception? I mean, those two dialectical images of a poet, is that something that you perceive a poet is in today's like world?
What, traveler, you mean?
Yeah, or you know, what is the role of the poet?
We're constantly traveling and exploring. You know, my previous books was Love and Strange Horses, and it was the 3 movements of the heart. Is as much traveling as Poet in Andalucía. I think it's just, you know, we don't set out on a, you know, plan, and it just comes to us. It's very organic, right? And I think that's what just being creating art is. Actually, I think that if we put so much thought into it, you know, that breath, that initial, you know, raw feeling that you get when even you as a reader, you probably wouldn't get it because, you know, there's too much of the mind in it. So yeah.
Ditto.
I remember like maybe the past year I sat at, you know, at a panel about identity, and identity poetry or poetic identities. And it's interesting that most people suggest that we're beyond identity politics, or there's no such thing as, you know, that identity is not important in how they write poetry anymore, which to me is a bit troubling, you know, with Stop and Frisk, for instance, even Trayvon Martin. I mean, identity is very much ingrained. I would just like to hear your thoughts on that. Are we beyond identity in 2013?
You know, I think identity is like, I mean, it's a problem. I mean, it's like time. You can't escape it.
Right.
You know, and so I don't think. I mean, I think it's strange that someone would say that we're beyond identity when now, while we have such a diversity of a spectrum of voices, a spectrum of identities represented on the page. But I think if I'm reading, you know, Stephen Dunn or Gerald Stern, those guys are writing about identity as much as any, you know, poet of color or gay lesbian poet or anything else. I mean, I don't think you can really escape identity. You have to kind of write out of your experiential knowledge and out of what informs your life, you know, and so that's what's going to come to the page.
Right. I'm really just baffled what that means when someone says that. So I guess I just want to be illuminated
the thing is, if Gerald Stern writes about identity, it's not necessarily labeled as identity.
Right.
Exactly. He writes about identity,
I
write about identity.
I think
you know?
what that I word means to someone is different in terms of, I mean, of course, race or gender or whatnot. So, but I'm curious, especially what you think, because you have been all over the world.
I've been, you know, people have called me just about every single identity I can think of. And I just, you know, coming from different linguistic traditions, I grew up with 4 or 5 languages. I don't even know if I have a mother tongue. These languages were spoken, just together all at once. You know, every member of my family just spoke whatever language they were most comfortable in, and the other answered in whatever language they were most comfortable in. So it really creates another space for what we understand language to be. So when I went to French school and they were just more pure with the French language, I thought, oh my God, how am I ever going to exist in this? And that's why, sort of coming into the American English, I was just thrilled. And when I'm in Europe, they're like, you know, you have such an American accent, you're so American. And in here, I'm trying so hard to have an American accent. So, you know, in every context in which I've existed in, you know, someone has put me on, you know, the other. And so tonight, for example, when I was reading the poem on, you know, about the Bowery, and just sort of that Americana voice that's in my head, you know, it kind of, when you were reading your poem about the man practicing love in his mind, that's how I feel like I'm always practicing all these, and in my mind and in my head, they sound like one way. But I've given myself permission to explore those voices. And whether or not that voice in that Haitian book or that voice in Poet in Andalucía or in Love and Strange Voices and whatever else I write, I'm not going to question what it means or how people want to define it. I'm just going to allow myself to go there because that's who I am. And why do we have to, I mean, these labels, you know, these constant labels. You know, someone once wrote that I went to a reading and they wrote Palestinian American next to my name. And that was the strangest identity because I'm not Palestinian American. You know, I mean, if you're going to write my, just call me American or call me, or if you're going to write everything, just, you know, explain everything because I did not have a Palestinian American identity. I did not grow up like that. I'm very much a Latina. I'm very French. I'm very Middle Eastern, and you know I'm American too. And that's, I know who I am, and it's okay for others to define me the way they feel I am. You know, that's fine because we're always going to have the gaze of the other.
So you write and deal with race. I know also you both are teachers. With you know subjects you know as fraught and sensitive as race, how do you deal with that in the classroom in terms of writing about race or talking about race as teachers in a workshop situation or a class situation?
You know, I mean, for me, it's sort of, it's like, you know, those moments of when you're with someone and there's the uncomfortable silence. Like, you know, sometimes you just have to be okay with it, like, and let that stand. And you know, when I think about issues around race in the writing, the spectrum is again, it keeps distending. You know, it keeps opening up. So the concept of saying that something is, you know, authentically black, for instance, you know, that's just beyond my scope. I mean, I feel like the idea that's kind of anachronized. And I mean, not to get too political, but I mean, I was thinking about, you know, the response that Baraka had to Angles of Ascent, the Callaloo anthology, right? You know, it's a fairly anachronized position to think that, you know, this is what the African American poetic voice should be. With the broad spectrum of voices from, you know, someone like, you know, Douglas Kearney and Harriet Mullen, you know, to Marilyn Nelson, Nikki Finney. I mean, there are all these different voices. So, you know, how can you deny that is a part of this larger diasporic aesthetic? You know, not just culture, but also a larger aesthetic and a larger imagination. And I feel like we finally at a point on the timeline where people can have the freedom to say, you know, this is how I express it, without it being having to be labeled. And you know, but I think people they want that because it's a market in it. You know, it's a market in talking about this is what this culture is or does, and this is what it does not do. And these are where the lines are demarcated. I just think it's the opposite of progress.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple more questions because that's kind of heavy stuff. What I want to do is like an actor studio thing. You know, I'm James Lipton. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of series of quick questions, and then we're going to open it up. What is your favorite word?
That's supposed to be curse word. Is it supposed to be curse
There's one later.
Oh, God.
That's a good one.
It has to be quick.
I
I know.
I don't know if I have a favorite word.
See, my favorite word is peanut. It is. It makes me smile all the time. So you say it, you smile, right?
We've lost our words.
I know.
We've lost our words.
I think maybe Karari, because it's a word I got from Césaire.
Oh.
What's the word?
Karari, poison.
Oh my God, I don't know that I can choose a word.
Do you want to go to the second question?
The only word I can think of is a curse word in Spanish.
Oh, give us that.
Joder.
What does that mean?
Fernando, tell them what it means. But Fernando here is a wonderful Andalusian poet who's leaving tomorrow to go back to Andalucía.
Oh, wow.
You can read his poem that I translated in the Cortland Review, and so yes.
Well, what is your least favorite word?
Race.
That's a good one. Hate.
What sound do you love?
Laughter.
Silence.
What sound do you hate?
Ticking.
I don't know. I'm crying. I don't know.
So what is your favorite curse word? I was going to skip that.
Oh, no.
That's my favorite curse word too. Oh,
I know.
This is hard. This is hard.
Last one. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God or whomever say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
My man. I'm welcome.
You could be whoever you want to be.
So we're opening up to questions. If anybody have any questions? There are mics on each side, so go ahead.
Oh, I have a question. Natalie, I don't know when you began the book in interviewing Haitians in Dominican Republic. The announcement about a month and a half ago that the Dominican government was now going to send back all the Haitians that had been there for generation and generation and generation and generation. How did that news affect your thinking about the work that you're working on?
You know, it's so outrageous, really. But somehow I was also not surprised. I mean, the racial politics on that island, and really racial politics in Latin America, is a very heavy one. And it's discussed very differently than it is here, and experienced very differently as well. Because there's sometimes, I mean, you could very easily go to a Dominican, I don't know, hairdressing salon, and people will say things like, oh, you know, I have to go marry a white guy to ameliorate the race. I mean, people could just say that as if I'm going to drink water, you know, a glass of water. So the way that race is talked about, and the way that this, you know, and also who is considered white, you know, over there. I mean, if you're, you know, just lighter skinned. I mean, we have to remember that, you know, they had a Trujillo, they had a dictator who brought in Europeans to mix with the natives. So I wasn't surprised. And the Haitian Dominican, actually Edwidge Danicat was telling me, you know, I have to write an op-ed about it. But it's just, it's a very, very complicated history between the two. And so I don't know how it affected, it's so recent, I don't know what will come out, looking at the books.
Your view didn't become altered by the announcement?
No, because, I know this politics.
Okay.
This politics, being on the island, it's really not something that, that they could actually do that. It's just blows my mind. But on the other hand, I'm also not surprised. There's...
Well, first I'd like to say thank you so much for the readings and conversations. Just wonderful. I have a question for both Natalie and Van, but it really comes out of something that you, Natalie, introduced into a workshop you taught for CavanKerry a couple of years ago called Writing Across Cultures. And I noticed that a number of your exercises had to do with forcing poets to become very uncomfortable. Just stepping out of a comfort zone, whether it is with subject matter, linguistically, and I can't remember if this was your exercise, but people in the workshop paired off and had to write with a word they didn't even know the meaning of. And that was a challenge that the poets ultimately met, but there really was some discomfiture with that. And so really that's my question about how do you make yourself uncomfortable as poets, so very uncomfortable that your writing really goes into new places, or does the world simply provide that for you? How does it happen for you?
I feel like every time I sit down to write, I'm uncomfortable, and that's one of the things I find attractive about it. Every time I approach it, it feels like the first time. It's always a challenge. So I'm never really looking to make it easier. I'm just sort of looking for ways to work through it, which I'm constantly learning from that process.
Just to follow up on that, when Joseph asked you about form, you talked about coming to the sonnet with the screenplay directions. That sounds as though that was one of those places where you didn't have a comfortable solution and you found a kind of new hybrid. Yeah. So often for me, I find that I'm coming to the page with no idea of how to do it. And so, the artistic problem becomes, well, how will I figure out a way to deal with this subject matter in a structure that complements it? And sometimes it's beyond my scope, So I'm trying one thing, and then it morphs into something else. And so, maybe I'm trying to write a pantoum. I've never written a good one, and then which is why it always morphs into something else, But sometimes you need some kind of structure in place or restriction in place to put you in the right direction, And I said all the time to my students that my poems are smarter than I am, because I always discover something in them. Because they're always pushing me to do something that I wouldn't normally do if I didn't have that level of discomfort.
I feel like being in an uncomfortable space, being dislocated, is a place where I've probably found the most enlightened. I've found a lot of light and understanding about so much, and I want the students to experience that, because often they come and they bring poems they've written before, and they want to work on that same poem, and they really want to be comfortable, and they don't want to be challenged. And taking them to that space where they don't know what they're doing and what they're expecting, and then for them to realize that they can create something in a place they didn't expect is an incredibly powerful experience, I think. And in all the years that I've taught, it's never failed in the sense that it's sort of there's a a unity of some sort that is created in the student, in the writer, where he's in conversation with something he wasn't expecting, but that conversation is sort of uniting him to his voice or that source inside of him,
Thank you for the reading. My question is, I'm a prose writer, but I'm also a poet. It's like, remember that Hair, the guy who was like, I'm also a client. I always feel like that. But one of the things that I'm really interested in for both of you is, and you can pick a poem from one of the pieces from each of your books. Where were you when you sat down to write one of the poems? Because one of the things I'm realizing hearing you both speak about your stuff is I can, for some of my poems and my writing, I can pinpoint, I know how I was feeling that day, right? When it came out, how shocked I was when it did come out, like, oh my God, where did that come from? And then like, what is your process? Because one of the things that I think is a fair for me as a writer is understanding not how to critique my own work, but how do you know your work, how do you know it's done, right? There's this quote where it's like an artist is never really finished, so basically he just has to abandon his work. He needs to get away from it, right? So how did you know for one of your pieces, like where were you, how did it come out? Like, how were you feeling that day? And then what was the process to get yourself to that point where you were like, I think there's nothing more that I can do with this?
So now, as I said before, each poem is a different experience, right? And so they're poems that once they're done, they're really, I feel like they're done. Like I've said what needed to be said. And then they're poems, whether they're in a book or just in a drawer, that constantly change. I mean, I read poems that have been published often differently because I'll change things later because I've had some sort of insight into that moment in the poem. But I think there's a sense of getting something said. For me, when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about the poem capturing a frame of mind, and either capturing a frame of mind or approximating an emotion in a situation. And I feel like I've gotten to that. And people, often the workshop for me is a reading, and so if someone responds to that poem, now and I don't mean just sort of like publishing the poem in a journal or someone applauding at the end of the reading, but someone saying, I really connected with that moment, or really connected with this thing that you did in the poem, then I know it's getting some work done. But sometimes you'll hear the poem later at a podium, in a microphone, and you'll hear something and you'll think, oh, I don't like the way that sounds now, and you end up changing it still. So I just feel like it's sort of fluid in that way, and I try not to, try to be too hard on myself about it, so.
For Poet in Andalucía, my last book was published in 2010, and this one was 2012, which was really fast. But the truth is that I've been writing this book for like 20 years in my head. And suddenly it came out in a breath. That's how it feels to me. But it's not something I just wrote. And I often feel that those things happen. It's like the story I was saying, I left, like the circle closed and everything just came together. The reason I spoke about the story of Ginsberg interviewing him is that when Darwish died in 2008, I started writing a poem called After Kaddish, because that was his favorite poem. And it's really a conversation between me with Mahmoud and Ginsberg. And I still haven't published it, it's still there. I think it's like, I feel like it might be finished, but I feel like not yet. Like there's something else I need, so it's there. And so we have, you know, I feel there are moments, like what you said, where you write a poem and it comes out. And then there are moments where you leave it. But I feel like most of the time, it's been sort of coming to life in your mind for a very long time, you know? And what was the last thing you said? I had a thought after it, and I forgot. The thought just flew. What was the last thing you?
I don't remember myself.
Okay. So we're both. But yes, so there are moments where I remember certain things, but you know, memory becomes very. It's sort of like trying to write a memoir where you don't know when it happened or exactly how it happened. I feel it's sort of like that when you're writing, you know, poetry. Like sometimes I think I wrote it there. Like there are moments where I feel that because that image of that place is so vivid to me, you know? But other times, no. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. I always workshop a poem at my reading. Like I read one poem that I've never read before, like tonight. And, you know, you also realize that sometimes, whether in my case, sometimes, you know, I can't get the humor right. Like, you know, the humor is, I didn't really grow up reading literature, like that's, you know, and the idea of humor until I came to the United States. And just sometimes allowing myself to be humorous on the page is the biggest challenge ever, you know? Because it's like I'm like breaking the law, the rule, you know, like you're not allowed to do that. And so I read it, and I realize, okay, I can work on the page, but I can't read it because my accent is just going to mess it up, you know. But so I try to do that at every reading.
You know, I was thinking about something else, about remembering where you were, remembering when you wrote the poem. And I was thinking about, you know, I've been places, recently I was at I did a reading of, well, a little something at an elementary school. And these kids, you know, they asked me to read a poem that their teacher had found online. And it was one of my poems. And I didn't remember anything about this poem. And I saw the poem, and I had a recollection of writing the poem. But I had absolutely no idea like what was going to happen when I started reading it, because I never read it aloud to anyone. And I could not remember writing that poem. And I was reading it as if it were, you know, it could have been Natalie's poem. So, you know, I was just like, I was reading it like, oh, wow, this is interesting, okay. You know, and it's funny how over time there's that distance. Yeah. Because I think there is something, not to sound too new agey about it, but there's something that becomes sort of a trance. Like you're in it and you're sort of writing, and once you allow yourself to sort of be in that space, and then you're out of it, and you have to go back to work or something, you know, and you realize, I don't remember how I got there, but then you remember that's why I always try to get there, you know, because you want to be back in that space.
Yeah, so true.
First, thank you for the reading. My question is directed to both poets, because I know, Miss Natalie, you have a lot of poems that deal with like traveling and going different places, you know, it's a background. And Mr. Jordan, I know your poems in the book are about films and themes. So I wonder if y'all could like describe the process of like ordering those poems, and is that a difficult task, because you know films deal with a lot of themes and a lot of things, and you know you go to different places, different experiences, different languages, so how do you like make the decision of like how those poems like talk to each other in like a collection?
He's like, talk.
Well, I think about that quite a bit, you know, and the main reason I think about it more now is because I'm always I'm working with my students as they're working through their projects and their poems. And I think the biggest, I don't want to say advice, but I guess the thing that I try to convey is to keep in mind that there's an experience of reading the book, you know, and that you need to have some sense of what you want that experience to be for the reader. And so, you know, and I always give them the example that if I handed them, you know, a 500-page novel, and I said, man, you got to read this novel. It's so good. You're going to pick the novel up, right? And you're going to go, page 1, page 2, until you get to 500. But if I say that with a collection of poems, you'll pick the collection up and you'll start flipping through and you start, oh, page 111. I'm going to start here because I like this title. And it kind of changes that experience of the read that you designed in your mind. But if you design it in such a way, you're thinking about it in such a way that when they come to that collection, when they get to that last poem, there's been enough information, poem by poem by poem, that's built up a certain experience, either an emotional trajectory, psychological trajectory. There's been enough ordering of information from poem to poem that when they get to that last poem, that they should feel something. That you should have an idea in your mind of what you want them to feel. You don't have any control over it, honestly, but you should at least think about that and hope, let that be your ambition. And I think that's really the only way I know how to think about that process of sequencing, is to think about it in terms of what I want that reader to experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the other thing is that, what the beauty is that you can read it the way the author has, the way I designed it, just like you. But also, if you take it and you open it on page 97, it's also okay. And that's the great thing about Cortázar's novel Hopscotch. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. It's a masterpiece. But really, I have to say thank you to Lucille Clifton. She was my teacher, and she told me that she would put all her poems on the floor and see how her poems were having conversations with each other, and that really stayed with me. And yeah.
Anyone else?
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.